Is this some kind of joke? The question, sharp and laced with derision, cut through the tense air humming around the base of the silent radar installation. Captain Eva Rostova, head of the 3rd Marine Engineering Battalion's Special Projects Team, stood with her arms crossed, a data slate clutched in one hand. Her eyes, narrowed in disbelief, were fixed on the old man standing before her. General Madsen told me he was sending an expert. He didn't say he was sending a museum piece. A few of her younger engineers, bright minds from the best technical universities in the country, stifled smirks. For 3 agonizing days they had thrown everything in their modern arsenal at the ANFPS 132 phased array radar. The colossal 5-story tall dish the unblinking eye meant to guard this stretch of coastline was dead. They had run every diagnostic, cross-referenced every schematic, and consulted with the manufacturer's top minds via secure video link. The result was always the same, a cascade of error codes that led nowhere. The silence from the radar was a tactical blindness, a glaring vulnerability that had the entire base command on edge. And General Madsen's solution was this man. Bernard Owens looked to be at least 80. He wore faded denim jeans, a simple plaid shirt, and worn leather work boots. He held no data slate, no diagnostic sensor array. In his hand he carried a small weathered leather tool roll that looked like it had survived a war, or 3. He didn't react to Captain Rostova's insult. His gaze wasn't on her, or her team of frustrated prodigies. It was fixed upward, on the immense lifeless structure of steel and composite materials. His calm was a stark island in their sea of anxious energy. "With all due respect, sir," Rostova continued, her voice dripping with a condescension she didn't bother to hide, "we have terabytes of real-time diagnostic data we're trying to parse. What exactly do you think you can contribute?" Bernard finally lowered his gaze. His eyes, a pale but startlingly clear blue, met hers. They held no anger, no defensiveness, only a quiet, unnerving focus. "I'm here to take a look," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "The general asked me to take a look," a young lieutenant scoffed from behind Rostova. "We've had thermal, acoustic, and electromagnetic imaging done on every square inch of that array. We have the data. What are you going to do? Feel its pulse?" The comment earned a few nervous chuckles. The air was thick with the intellectual arrogance of the young and the brilliant. They saw a man out of time, an analog relic in their digital world. They had equations, algorithms, and processing power. He had wrinkles and a tool roll. It was, to them, an absurdity. Rostova gestured impatiently at the silent behemoth. "The primary power conduits are stable. The coolant systems are cycling perfectly. The command and control interface is reporting a full system handshake. But the emitter arrays are completely dark. It's a ghost in the machine, a software issue most likely, something we haven't encountered." Bernard gave a slow, deliberate nod. He didn't look at their screens, at the endless lines of code and data streams. Instead, he started walking. He moved with a slow, steady gait, his hand running lightly along the massive concrete plinth that supported the radar. His team watched him, a mixture of pity and annoyance on their faces. It was a performance, they thought, a folksy act for the general's benefit. "Sir, the Foundation is seismically certified to withstand a magnitude 8 earthquake," Rostova called out, her patience wearing thin. "I assure you the problem is not a crack in the concrete." Bernard didn't answer. He continued his slow circuit, his head cocked as if listening to something they couldn't hear. He stopped near a heavy steel access panel, knelt down with a slight groan, and pressed his palm flat against the cold metal. He closed his eyes. The engineers exchanged glances. This was beyond absurd. It was embarrassing. Rostova felt a flush of anger. The general was undermining her authority, making a mockery of her and her team's expertise by bringing in this shaman. "All right, that's enough," she snapped, her voice sharp with finality. "Sergeant, please escort Mr. Owens back to the visitor center. We have actual work to do." Bernard opened his eyes. He ignored the approaching sergeant. He looked at Rostova. "The new generator," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the tense silence. "The one you installed last month. Where is its foundation relative to this one?" Rostova was taken aback. "What does the backup generator have to do with anything? It's 50 yards away, completely isolated. We're on main grid power. The generator isn't even running." "Doesn't matter if it's running," Bernard said, pushing himself slowly to his feet. He unrolled his leather toolkit on a nearby crate. The tools inside were old, worn smooth with use. Some of them looked handmade, forged and welded for purposes no one could guess. He picked up one in particular, a long, slender piece of steel with a 2-pronged fork at one end and a weighted handle. It looked more like a tuning fork than a wrench. He held it up. "What in God's name is that?" the young lieutenant muttered. Rostova's face hardened. That tool, that archaic custom-made thing was the final insult. It was a symbol of everything she was fighting against, an unscientific, gut-feeling approach to a problem that demanded precision, data, and modern methodology. The old man was a living embodiment of outdated nostalgia, and the general had inexplicably invited him into her high-tech cathedral. The world seemed to fall away for a moment, the sounds of the bass fading into a dull roar in Bernard's ears. He wasn't looking at the scornful faces of the young engineers. He was seeing the tool in his hand not as it was now, but as it had been. He was 20 years old again, huddled in a frozen muddy trench outside of Hungnam. The biting Korean wind howled around him, and the only light came from the sporadic flashes of artillery on the horizon. The battalion's primary long-range radio was dead. A piece of shrapnel had torn through the casing and shattered a crucial crystal oscillator, a component they had no replacement for. Without it, they couldn't coordinate an evacuation. They were blind, deaf, and freezing to death. While others despaired, a young Bernard Owens worked. Using a piece of a ruined Jeep's leaf spring, a spent shell casing, and a camp stove for a forge, he had crafted this, not a wrench but a resonator, a tool designed to find a specific harmonic frequency. He was using it to try and find a vibration in the radio's chassis that would mimic the lost crystal's function, a 1 in a million shot. The memory was sharp, visceral, the smell of hot metal and ozone, the desperate focused look on the faces of his fellow Marines watching him work, the weight of their lives resting on a piece of scrap metal he was beating into shape. He blinked, the memory receding, leaving only the weight of the tool in his old wrinkled hand. He saw the condescending smirk on the lieutenant's face, the utter dismissal in Captain Rostova's eyes as she looked at the very instrument that had saved 150 men from annihilation. And he understood. They couldn't see the history. They couldn't see the knowledge paid for in blood and fear. They only saw a piece of old, strange-looking metal. Watching from a distance near the doorway of the radar's control building was Chief Warrant Officer Mills. He was a man who had been in the Marine Corps for 25 years, a man who served General Madsen directly as a special liaison. The general's orders had been simple. Take Mr. Owens to the site. Stay out of his way, but don't let anyone else get in his way either. Call me if there's a problem. Mills had seen enough. The open contempt, the snide remarks, the captain's escalating hostility. It was more than just a problem. It was an embarrassment. Captain Rostova was a brilliant engineer, but her arrogance was a blinding light, and she was about to commit a career-ending sin. She was about to physically remove a guest who had been personally summoned by the base commander. A guest who, Mills was beginning to suspect, was far more than he appeared. As Rostova gestured for the sergeant to take Bernard's arm, her voice rising in command, "I said, get him out of here, now. That is an order." Mills slipped back inside the control room. He pulled out his satellite phone and hit a single speed dial number that connected directly to the general's aide. "This is Mills," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You need to get the general. Tell him it's about his consultant at the array." There was a pause. "No, sir, he isn't in any danger. He's just being treated poorly. Captain Rostova is about to have him thrown out." Mills listened for a moment, his eyes on the scene outside. Bernard was standing his ground, calm as a stone in a river, as the sergeant reluctantly approached him. "Yes, sir, that's his name. Owens, Bernard Owens." He listened again, his eyebrows shooting up his forehead. "Yes, sir, I'll do my best to delay them." He ended the call, a new profound sense of urgency coursing through him. He had no idea who Bernard Owens was, but judging by the reaction on the other end of the line, Captain Rostova had just kicked a hornet's nest the size of a battleship. Inside the base command headquarters, General Madsen was terminating a secure video conference with the Pentagon when his aide burst into the office without knocking, his face pale. "General, you need to come now. It's about Mr. Owens." Madsen stood up, his demeanor shifting from bureaucratic weariness to sharp-edged concern. "What about him? Is he all right?" "He's fine, sir, but there's a situation at the radar site. Chief Mills just called. Captain Rostova is trying to have Mr. Owens removed. She's treating him like a senile old man." The general's face, a landscape carved by decades of command, darkened with a rare and terrible anger. It was a quiet fury, far more frightening than any shout. "She's doing what?" he asked, his voice a low growl. He walked over to his terminal and typed a few commands. A classified service record appeared on the screen, dominated by a black and white photo of a young, intense-looking Marine. "Did Mills confirm the name?" the general asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Yes, sir. Bernard Owens." Madsen stared at the file. "The ghost of the grid," he murmured, a title spoken with a reverence bordering on awe. For 30 years, anytime a piece of high-tech gear went down in a war zone and no one could fix it, they sent for him. No official record, no paper trail. He'd show up, fix the impossible, and disappear. The man practically wrote the book on battlefield engineering because he invented it as he went along. The core emitter design in that very radar system is based on a concept he pioneered during a siege in the jungle when all he had was a captured enemy radio and a roll of copper wire. He looked at his aide, his eyes blazing. He didn't just get a Medal of Honor for his service. They created a special commendation for him, a citation for technological genius under fire, because what he did was so far beyond the normal scope of valor. And Eva Rostova, with her master's degree and her shiny new toolkit, is trying to have him thrown out. The general grabbed his cover from his desk. Get the command vehicle, now. And get the sergeant major. I want him with me. He was already moving, his strides long and purposeful. Captain Rostova wanted an expert. She's about to find out she has a living legend. Back at the silent radar dish, the standoff had reached its peak. The sergeant had reluctantly placed a hand on Bernard's elbow. Sir, I'm sorry, but the captain has given me an order. I have to ask you to come with me. Bernard didn't resist. He simply looked at Captain Rostova, a hint of what might have been disappointment in his clear blue eyes. Rostova, emboldened by his compliance, took a step forward. This was her site, her responsibility. She would not have her authority questioned by an old man, no matter who sent him. Let this be a lesson, Mr. Owens, she said, her voice filled with the cold certainty of her position. This is the modern Marine Corps. We rely on data, not superstition. Your time has passed. I'll be recommending to the general that your visitor privileges be permanently revoked for interfering with critical defense infrastructure. She gestured for the sergeant to lead him away, turning back to her team with an air of finality. All right, let's get back to work. Run the primary cascade diagnostic again from the top. Her words were swallowed by the sudden piercing squeal of tires on asphalt. Two black command SUVs and the general's personal vehicle screeched to a halt just yards away, doors flying open before they had fully stopped. General Madsen emerged from the lead vehicle, his face a thundercloud of controlled rage. He was flanked by the base sergeant major, a man whose presence alone was enough to make colonels stand straighter. They moved with a speed and purpose that instantly froze everyone present. The confident chatter of the engineering team died in their throats. All eyes locked on the approaching storm. Rostova's jaw went slack. She spun around, her face instantly losing its color. General, I wasn't expecting you, sir. General Madsen walked right past her as if she were a ghost. He didn't spare her a single glance. His eyes, and the eyes of the sergeant major, were locked on one person, Bernard Owens. He marched directly up to the old man who was still standing calmly beside his roll of tools. The general stopped, his back ramrod straight, and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his life. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect, a salute one gives not to a subordinate or even a peer but to an icon. Mr. Owens, General Madsen's voice boomed, echoing in the stunned silence. It is an absolute honor to have you on my base. On behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I want to formally apologize for the disgraceful reception you have received from my personnel. The base sergeant major, followed by the other senior officers who had arrived, snapped to attention and rendered their own salutes to the old man in the plaid shirt. The team of young engineers stood paralyzed, their minds struggling to process the scene. Their brilliant, demanding captain had been utterly ignored. The base's highest-ranking officer was saluting the old man she had just tried to have thrown out. It was an inversion of the universe as they knew it. General Madsen dropped his salute but remained at attention. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the dumbfounded faces of Rostova's team, finally landing on her. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Captain," he began, his voice dangerously low, "you and your team have been staring at this problem for 72 hours. Let me tell you who you've been ignoring for the last 30 minutes. He took a deep breath, his voice rising in volume and intensity. "This is Bernard Owens. In the winter of 1950 at Chosin, then Corporal Owens rewired the frozen engine blocks of 6 transport trucks using communication wire and scavenged radio parts, allowing the evacuation of over 100 wounded men who would have otherwise been left behind. In Vietnam, he jury-rigged a downed aircraft's radar system into a crude but effective early warning system that saved an entire firebase from being overrun. For that, and a dozen other actions just like it, he was awarded the Medal of Honor." A collective gasp went through the crowd of engineers. They looked at Bernard, at his simple clothes and quiet demeanor, trying to reconcile the image with the legend being described. "But that's not all," the general continued, his voice ringing with authority. "Mr. Owens is unofficially known in certain circles as the ghost of the grid. He is, without question, the single greatest combat engineer this nation has ever produced. The foundational principles of phased array technology that you all studied at university. He was sketching them on the back of a ration box in a bunker in Quezon while under mortar fire. He has forgotten more about this technology than your entire team will ever know. And you, Captain, in your boundless arrogance, dismissed him. The rebuke was complete and devastating. It landed on Rostova with the force of a physical blow. She stood, white-faced and trembling, stripped of her authority and her pride in a matter of seconds. She finally looked at Bernard, truly looked at him, and saw not an old man but a titan whose shadow she hadn't even been able to perceive. The general turned his cold fury on her. Captain Rostova, your ignorance and your hubris are a disgrace to your rank. You are so enamored with the tools of the modern age that you failed to recognize the master who forged the principles they are built on. You are hereby relieved of your duties on this project. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. Sergeant Major, see to it. The Sergeant Major gave a grim nod. As the weight of the moment settled, Bernard Owens finally spoke. He stepped forward, his movements slow but deliberate. He wasn't looking at the general or the disgraced captain. He was looking at the silent radar. The general's a good talker, he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. But he gives me too much credit. He looked at Rostova, and there was no malice in his eyes, only a quiet weariness. You weren't wrong, Captain. You have to trust the data, but you have to know which data to look for. He picked up his strange forked tool. This machine is a living thing, in its own way. It groans, it breathes, it vibrates. You were all looking at the schematics, at the code. You were looking for the ghost in the machine, but you never stopped to listen to the machine itself. He walked to the access panel he had touched earlier, and tapped it with the weighted handle of his tool. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated from it. Your new generator foundation, he said, his voice now taking on the tone of a teacher. It was laid perfectly to code, but the soil composition here, it carries a low-frequency vibration. It's traveling through the bedrock and up through this concrete plinth. It's creating a harmonic resonance, a tiny subaudible shudder, in the primary waveguide assembly. Your sensors aren't calibrated to detect it because it's so far out of spec, but it's just enough to prevent the emitter crystals from firing in sequence. You don't have a software problem, Captain. You have a vibration problem. As he spoke, holding the custom-made resonator, another memory flashed. The cold bunker in Quezon, 1968. A young Marine, a radio man, watched him with wide, fearful eyes as he used the very same tool, freshly forged, to tap gently on the chassis of their only long-range radio. "What are you doing, Bernie?" the kid had whispered. Young Bernard Owens hadn't looked up. "I'm listening to the steel," he had answered. "It always tells you the truth if you're quiet enough to hear it." The truth then had been a micro-fracture in a vacuum tube, a flaw he could only find by the way the metal hummed. The truth now was the same, just on a much grander scale. Under Bernard's quiet instruction, the humbled engineering team, now led by the chastened lieutenant, swarmed into action. They didn't use their complex data slates. They used wrenches and vibration dampeners. Following Bernard's guidance, they placed specialized insulating pads at key points where the radar's superstructure met the concrete plinth. It was brutally simple, low-tech work. Within an hour, Bernard gave a nod. "Try it now," he said. The lieutenant, his hands smudged with grease, relayed the command into his headset. A low hum started from within the installation, a sound no one had heard for 3 days. It grew into a powerful thrum of energy. On the massive face of the array, 1,000 small points of light flickered to life in perfect unison. A cheer erupted from the assembled Marines. On the main screen inside the control room, the familiar sweeping green line of a successful radar search pattern appeared. The eye was open. The blindness was cured. In the days that followed, a formal directive from General Madsen's office circulated through every technical command on the base. It mandated a new 3-day training course for all engineering officers. It was called Foundational Diagnostics and the Lessons of the Ghost, and it focused not on the latest software but on the unchangeable physical principles that governed all machines. It became the most sought-after and respected course on the base. A week later, Eva Rostova, now reassigned to a mundane logistics analysis role, saw Bernard Owens sitting by himself in a corner of the mess hall, slowly stirring a cup of coffee. For days, she had replayed her own monumental failure of judgment in her mind. Taking a deep breath, she walked over to his table. "Mr. Owens," she said, her voice barely a whisper, May I sit down?" He looked up, and his pale blue eyes held no judgment. He simply gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please, Captain." She sat, her hands trembling slightly. "Sir, There are no words to properly apologize for my conduct. Bernard took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't say, "It's okay," or "Apology accepted." He just looked at her for a long moment. "I worked on my first engine when I was 14, he said, his voice soft. "It was for a water pump on my family's farm. I spent a week taking it apart and putting it back together. I thought I knew everything about it, but I couldn't get it to start. My grandfather came out, watched me for about 10 minutes, and then he walked over and flicked a single pebble out of the fuel intake valve." Bernard smiled at the memory. "He told me that being smart is knowing how to take the machine apart. Being wise is knowing to check for the pebble first. You're very smart, Captain. The wisdom will come." He stood up, leaving his coffee on the table. "You just have to remember to listen for the pebbles." He gave her a small grandfatherly nod and walked away, leaving her alone with his lesson, a lesson far more valuable than anything she had learned from a textbook. The quiet wisdom of heroes like Bernard Owens is a timeless reminder that the greatest strength is often found not in the noise of new technology, but in the silent, steady foundations of experience and humility. These are the stories of valor that truly build the world. If you were inspired by the story of the Ghost of the Grid, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of the unassuming heroes who walk among us.